how does a scout see this type of genetic potential in a high school kid or a college kid? What do they look for?
Well, think about this. If everything, and I know you were blown away by this, everything is filmed.
Right.
So every high school game.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's extremely interesting to me.
Everything's filmed. So as a college scout, they look at film. And what are they looking for? They're looking for the kid who's faster, who's bigger, who's stronger. They look in the program and, wow, look at this kid who's pretty athletic. He bends his knees pretty well. And
they see this on the film.
Yeah, so they're watching this on the film. Wow, he's a pretty big kid. They meet the kid and they're like, wow, he's 6'5", 250, and he's got a pretty big frame. Wow, there's his older brother who weighs 300 pounds. They're all pretty good. I mean, the kid runs pretty fast. And
all evidence of genetics.
Yeah.
Right.
And they bring them in, and while genetics are the starting point, there has to be some form of physical and intrinsic motivation to say, hey, you know what, I'm willing to go out and not only take a beating, but hand out a beating for days on end. And you know what, a lot of people have incredible physical gifts, but physically or emotionally or mentally or intrinsically
for whatever, they can't handle the training or the play.
Yeah.
Right.
Or or the rigors of going to school, having to deal with a life, and then play football,
right,
and then go on and then play in the NFL and have to deal with all the temptations and fun of playing in the NFL.
Right.
A lot of guys.
A lot of ways to get sidetracked.
Sure. There's a lot of rest areas in the road.
Right.
A lot of places to pull over and have a good time. But it's just something that is so ingrained within America. And I know that you and Max are different people. We're like we're 28th in the world in Olympic lifting, and the reason is because our best athletes aren't training for the Olympic Games.
Right.
Right. Are you telling you can watch?
Why would they be?
Well, you can watch on Sunday and see
what
guys,
would be the incentive, right?
Seeing receivers and running backs run. The Adrian Petersons of the world, and these guys that just flat out can fly. And you're watching these guys, and they're out there running, doing stuff, and you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if those guys were, track athletes.
What would USATF do with those guys?
Yeah.
Right.
Or
right.
And maybe it would be something like you talk about USAW, not worrying about strength, just teach the technique.
Right.
You have a guy who can naturally walk in and back squat 800 pounds or bench 500.
Their approach might work just fine for him.
Sure.
But in the absence of the genetic ability to possess this strength without a huge amount of training, like it took me to develop whatever little strength I developed, you've got to pay attention to developing that strength, because we don't have the athlete base that the NFL does.
Sure.
It's such an obvious problem, but I don't see a solution to it, I don't know that we're going to.
The thing that I always crutched on, and my saving grace, and probably why the reason I was able to play all these years, was that even though there might have been somebody that was a little bigger than me, stronger or faster, stronger, whatever, I was always strong. That was my crutch. That even when I broke my leg, I ended up breaking my leg in my 4th year, and they casted me for, something like 5 days, and 3 weeks later I played 17 weeks.
This your fibula, when you broke your fibula?
I shattered it, and I had terrible mobility because my leg was broken. But the thing imagine that. But I knew that the guy lined up about 3 feet from me, and as soon as the ball was snapped, I could take one step, and as long as I could see him and he was close enough, I could grab him and hold on to him, or I could punch him and hit him. And being physically stronger than people always helped me overcome different things. Like if that guy might have been a little bit better athlete, he might have been a little faster, he sure as hell wasn't going to be stronger than me.
Right.
And
what's the average length of a career in the NFL?
A little over 3 years, right around 3 years.
What is the difference between that guy and you?
Well, it's kind of a skewed
genetics, obviously, but
it's a skewed number, because in the NFL you can play or you can't. There's a guy that either plays a day or he plays 10 years.
Right.
So rarely do you see
There's not a lot of guys with 6-year careers.
No, and there's not a lot of. Well, you know what? You're rarely going to see a guy that had 4 years in.
Right.
But, you're going to see a guy that maybe played 1 or 2.
Right.
But then you're going to see guys that played 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years.
Right.
Right. The guys that you see 6, 7-year guys, usually injury.
Right.
They could play, but they got injured in their career.
Right.
So that 3 years is kind of skewed, because either you play a day or you play 10.
Right.
It's such an interesting thing. If you look at the starters in the NFL, rarely do you see a 1 or 2 year guy. Most of the guys, other guys played 7, 8 years, because if you can do it, you can do it. And
right.
It's tough to come into a team.
And they start you, and then the guys that end up playing 1, 2, 3 seasons
are the backups.
And
then they roll out.
And then they either cycle forward
Yeah.
or they're gone.
Exactly.
What is the? Do you see a difference in the quality of the athlete that determines the 10-year career versus the 2-year career?
No.
It's just
Desire.
pretty much
Desire.
here and luck.
Luck and desire. Not getting injured, having that intrinsic motivation. It's kind of this can be a horrible analogy because in wake of the Michael Vick thing, but like you look at certain dogs. You have I have 2 pit bulls and they're the sweetest dogs in the world.
Oh yeah.
But yet when they are fighting over a rope and they'll battle, one will give up before the other. My one dog Bear will never give up.
Right.
And whereas my other dog Rocky gets it shook out of his mouth and he's fine, he'll come over to get petted. So
it's just a makeup of the brain.
It's just something.
Right.
Even though Rocky's bigger, more genetically gifted than Bear, Bear has more intrinsic. He's not going to give up.
He just got a lot of chew in him, doesn't he?
Or they, a lot of game in him. I think is the term they use.
Yeah.
I think players are the same way. You might have a guy that might be bigger and stronger and faster and have this incredible amount of talent, and you might have a guy that might not be as talented, and might not look the part. I played with a guy, Hank Fraley, who, if you saw Hank on the street, probably you wouldn't have thought he was a football player. Didn't really fit the physical build,
right.
But yet was an incredible athlete and had an incredible ability to play, and was a smart guy. And out of being a free agent, came in and started for us, and has put together a nice 10-year career.
Oh.
And but if you saw him on the street, he looked like I remember Dave Diazinfante used to say he looked like a guy that won a contest to be a football player or was driving a beer truck. But Hank, I watched Hank get out there and play left tackle and had incredible feet and incredible hands and had all these physical gifts that just didn't really pass the airport test or the bus test. We used to call that they're like certain guys that look like Tarzan, the guy you want getting off the bus first, where they see him and they're like, oh, this guy's going to kill us. So that we call that the bus of the airport test. Does he pass that? Does he get off the bus first? But there's a million of those guys that are look like $1 million,
right.
Big, strong, powerful, all these type of things, but yet lack that.
But they're just not football players.
Well,
do you remember when Kazmaier, back years ago, Bill Kazmaier, who had already won World's Strongest Man, I believe, if my timeline is correctly, he'd won it a couple of times, and had benched up in the mid 6s and or low 6s. I can't remember. Bill he was up over 600 before he tore his pec.
Yeah.
And had a long powerlifting career, was just a behemoth, a mastodon of a guy.
Yeah.
Tries to go play for Green Bay, right? And gets his ass handed to him. And I may be harsh, and I may be saying that about the wrong guy, but he just couldn't play football. There's more to it than being big and strong.
Sure. And you have to do it for a long time. They say that I went recently, and I know there's a whole bunch of stuff going on about these concussions and brain scans and different stuff.
Right.
So I actually went to the Amen Clinic and had my brain scanned. And when I sat there with Dr. Amen, he explained to me that the NFL, each hit is like a 30-mile-an-hour car wreck. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. But he goes, but it's not a car wreck with a seatbelt. It's you going through the windshield at 30 miles an hour every hit.
And that's what it does to your brain.
So that's what it does to your brain. He goes, but here's the deal. He goes, you've had a 30-mile-an-hour car wreck. Somebody goes through the windshield, they die. And he goes, you guys will do it 70 times a day for years. I was like, okay, well, why does one person die or the other? He said, probably because you started with a 3-mile-an-hour car wreck, then you went to a 5, then you went to a 10, then you went to a 15. Adaptation. He goes, you guys, over the years, by the time you're 23, 24, 25 years old, can take the hits.
You're basically used to having a concussion.
Whereas most people, if you were to give them the pads and put them out there on a Sunday and be like, all right, you're going to hit this guy, would probably have some serious brain trauma and paralysis or death from these hits. So
there's a type of conditioning that a football player, especially at the upper levels, has undergone that is completely aside from strength and from conditioning.
Sure. Yeah, it's a physical hardening. So whereas Kaz probably went out there and was big and strong and all this stuff, we probably had put on this helmet and probably got hit about 3 times in the head by some guy that
is used to doing it.
Doing it, and he probably eyes rolled back in his head, his feet got weak, and he probably got sick to his stomach and said, "Man, I can't do this." And that happens quite often. I mean,
right.
we went to training camp with the Chiefs a couple years ago, and Brock Lesnar shows up.
Right.
And Brock had got out of the WWE, and he wanted to come play football, and so they signed him Minnesota Vikings, and he lines up and he's playing defensive line. So, we go one-on-one pass pro, and I line up and I see this guy get over me, and he's, 6'3", 265. You see him on the UFC, and he looks like a monster.
Yeah.
He looked like a little,
about like that.
well, he looks like a little kid out to a bunch of 320-pound guys.
Yeah.
He's fighting a 200-pound guy in the ring. It's different.
Right.
So he gets out there, and the first play he stands straight up and tries to grab me on the outside of my shoulders and throw me. And, at the time I'm weighing 310, 312, and he's 265. And I think in his mind, mentally, he'd been a wrestler and different stuff, and he's thinking this will work. Little does he know that this is what I got paid to do my whole life. And I ended up hitting him in the helmet and punching him, and he kind of rolled back on his back, and that was the end of it. And, and then what we do is if you knock a guy down, you kind of pause for a second, and you wait for him to try to get up, and at that point you put your helmet through his chin and try to knock him unconscious. And then,
is that right?
Yeah. Well, we'll think about it, or that, or you do different. You teabag him or different stuff, where you wait for him to get up and step over and wipe your nuts on his head. But there's a deal where it's such a interesting environment that you almost have to grow up from the time you're a little kid doing this. And I can't imagine going and doing it, having not done it since I was a little kid.
Right.
It's probably like learning to Olympic lift at age 26 and pose from my 4-year-old nephew who practices with his PVC when he sees us Olympic lift.
Right.
All of a sudden at 4 years old, when he's 20 years old and he has 16 years of Olympic lifting, the bar is going to feel real natural, and all these movements are, what do you mean you don't know how to snatch?
Well, reputable authorities have made the claim that you, as a 26-year-old adult, you can't learn how to do the Olympic lift. Yeah. And gosh, John, that may be right. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
The thing that I always loved about the Olympic lifts, and somebody explained it to me very simply, was Olympic lifting is like vertical jumping with weight in your hand. So that's why I really enjoyed it. That's why I really liked it for my power athlete.
It certainly applies on the field, doesn't it? Yeah. It's a good, scalable way to increase your ability to explode.
So we went down this last week and we trained with Coach Bergner at his gym, and we were sitting there, and I think I've Olympic lifted 3 or 4 times in the last year since my injury. So we went down there and we were messing around, and had a pretty decent day. And Coach B was commenting. He's like, "Man, you have such great speed through the middle of your lift." And he's like, and he goes, "You get to full extension every time." And he goes, "You really pull the bar well." And I was like, "Well, look what I've been doing the last since I was a little kid. Everything was hip extension, and that's what we talk about.
Carryover, isn't it?
Well, you think about. If I'm running full speed, if I'm running full speed, or let's say I'm in a static position, I'm in my stance, and from we go from a stop position to 100 miles an hour and a snap of a ball, set hut, and the first thing you do is you drive off and you hit that guy, the one that reaches full extension, that can push their hips through and really drive with their body, is usually the one that hits the hardest and does well. So I see when I look at the Olympic movements, and especially my own training, there was nothing that I saw that could replicate that like Olympic lifting. One, being able to handle the weight in your hands, the grip strength, the physical strength that it took to move the bar, and the ability to get yourself into these squatted positions and actually come out and drive with the weight.
The combination of just strength and displaying that strength quickly.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting things to me is the difference between what you and I do at our gyms in terms of taking people off the street and immediately introducing them to barbell training, teaching them to snatch and to clean and jerk, teaching them to squat and press and bench press and deadlift. And what happens at the NFL in terms of strength conditioning. We had touched on this briefly earlier, and I kind of want to get back to this. Let's take this in 2 directions. The snatch and the clean and jerk are extremely useful ways to scale an increased adaptation to explosion.
Sure.
Why do you think they're not more utilized in this obvious place to use them?
Well, I think the thing that most people are forgetting is that if it's not broke, don't fix it. If you bring in a guy, another guy was fortunate enough to train with Rafael Ruiz, my first 6 years in the NFL, and Raphael was worked with Deion Sanders. And I remember he was telling me the story when Deion came to college. He came out and he ran like a 4.240. It's like the fastest they'd ever seen in Florida State. So Deion couldn't even touch his toes. He was so tight. He was like, eh. And so immediately, what do they say? If we can increase his flexibility, because we know that if you can increase flexibility, stride length increases, and you can get him to run faster. So they work on Deion's flexibility. Yeah, so he'll be able to, like the minute they'll be able, that they can fix his flexibility, that's the chink in his armor. So what do? They spend the whole year stretching and working on his flexibility to get his flexibility increased. What do you think happened?
He ran about a 4.35, right?
He ran slower.
Right.
So and that was an incredible.
What was
thing.
working for him? Yeah.
So the fact that he was wound so physically tight was like it was like a bullet being
It's just,
and so
he relied quite extensively on his ability to evoke the stretch reflex on each stride and stuff.
So,
and when you stretch him out, you water that down.
Exactly. So Raphael always said, if it wasn't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
So you bring in a lot of these coaches who, if the athlete never had any exposure to Olympic lifting, if your job as a strength coach is just to make sure that they're buff and polished, that they're keeping their strength up, I'm not going to go radical and say, hey, this guy's no exposure to Olympic lifting. He's already come to the NFL. He's already a pretty good player.
Right.
I just don't have to mess him up. So why am I going to take the time to teach him the Olympic movements? Whereas when I was in college, Coach Rice came in and he was like, hey, this is what we're going to do, is how the training works. And we had time to really learn it. And, what was killer was he came in and nobody even learned to clean. We actually all learned to snatch. And we didn't even really learn to clean until everybody could snatch well. And then at what point, when everybody was pretty competent with the snatch, we learned to clean, and then we actually never snatched again. Because, his deal was like
more weight for the clean.
Exactly, more weight to the clean, but if you can technically do the snatch, and people ask me why in the Power Athlete program, why we do the snatch so often, the reason I like it is, one, it's a longer pull. And it's,
longer range of motion over which to explode.
Yeah, longer pull, and, it just, to me, the snatch is such a harder lift and causes such much more explosion. And you can cheat the clean so much more.
Right. You can reverse curl the clean.
Exactly.
But you can't
reverse curl.
You can't muscle snatch a heavy amount of weight.
No.
And this always just puzzled me that a lot of college programs will utilize the hang snatch and the hang power clean.
Because all they're worried about is hip extension.
Right. When the fact of the matter is you get the same extension, but you get to train the longer range of motion if you pull the thing off the floor. Well, and my opinion on that is, why not?
Well, the reason is, and we've seen this from teaching people how to Olympic lift, for some reason from here to here, everybody can do it. The minute they go around their knees, they get amnesia. For some reason, south of the knees, like everything just goes to shit.
Right.
And I've
seen it a million times.
I watch it in our lifters who we've taught how to deadlift, that understand the idea of pulling the bar up and pulling their knees back, and that the bars are traveling in a straight line, that for some reason can't take the deadlift directly to the clean or the snatch.
Right.
And understand
can't build it into the build into the process, and I feel as though that's a coaching problem, not an athlete problem.
I mean, it's not easy to coach the Olympic lifts.
No.
I mean, I'm fortunate enough to.
But it's not that hard.
Well, yeah, but the thing about it is most people can't coach the Olympic movements because they can't really do it themselves.
Right.
And then, I feel pretty lucky to train with Max, who's a hell of an Olympic lifter and is a good coach, and Coach Bergner and different people, and Todd Rice was a good coach. So these different people all had a great way of teaching it. But it's amazing how I'll learn something and not do it, and somebody will say something and something will click in my head, and then all of a sudden that one cue was the difference between me doing something well and doing it bad.
Yeah.
And I think when you get to the NFL, you have a strength coach who's, let's say, he's making $150,000 a year, and you have a guy that's making $5 million a year. If the guy that's making $5 million is unhappy because the $150,000 strength coach is harassing him about doing stuff he doesn't want to do, who do you think they're going to fire?
Yeah. Yeah, it's obvious who's going to win that argument.
So they're going to bring in a strength coach that's going to put together a huge system that's going to fit everybody, because you have 50 guys. You might have one guy who believes squatting's bad for his knees, so he's just going to leg press. So you got to have a leg press. You got a guy who's going to want to do nothing but camber bar squats or Zerchers or this, So you're going to have to fit, all these different people. You're going to give them a million different leg presses, belt squats. all this different stuff, and you might have 1 or 2 squat racks. And when I went to the Patriots, they had three beautiful platforms that had Alico bars, Alico weights, and all this. And I went in there and it was like awesome, and nobody ever used it. And but if you look, there was when they gave me the card for the leg day, there was 50 different options, and they was like, pick whichever one you want. Well, I want to use the squat one. Really? I didn't see anybody use that in a while. But it's just all dependent on what you want to do or what training you come to, because you got to remember there's millions of coaches and everybody believes they're doing what they're doing is right.
Sure.
And it's it could be a guy like Mike Boyle who says squatting's bad for your knees, so don't squat. Squats are dead. Or you have a guy like Mark Rippetoe who's thinking like the squats are the basis of everything. You have another guy that says, well, hey, if I can't teach the guy to go around his knees, I'm just going to teach him to hang clean. And that's going to help me get the hip extension. He can lift heavy weights, and I don't have to overcoach this thing. So let's just let him hang clean it and get underneath it as quick as he can. So,
right.
You got all these different people, and it would be nice if all of a sudden there was this, governing body that got together and said, all right, everybody's going to learn to squat, they're going to learn to press, they're going to learn to bench, they're going to learn to deadlift, they're going to learn to clean and snatch, and they're going to learn to do all these movements, and we're going to teach all these coaches how to do them.
Right.
It's going to be standardized, and all these kids are going to learn how to do them. And then all of a sudden, when these kids are 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, they're going to learn it. And by the time they're 20 years old, they're all going to know how to do this stuff efficiently.
That sounds neat, but I've never been impressed by governing bodies as a general rule.
Maybe it's not a governing body, but maybe it's some form of underlining fitness movement or something that actually puts value in lifting weights.
Certainly. And I think that's developing. It's developed over the past few years. And
I think it's coming.
And we're going to continue to develop that just with the sheer weight of the evidence. This works. We all know it works, and it's our job to show you that it does.
What blew me away when I when I got out of the NFL and I started kind of working with non-professional athletes through the gym and traveling around teaching, the seminars and different things, I didn't realize that non-athletes wanted to learn to train like athletes. And then I kind of came up with this idea that everybody was an athlete, whether or not they wanted to or not, and that everybody should train to be athletic. And I think doing athletic movements teaches people to be athletes. Putting somebody in a machine and just asking them to move through the same range of motion and never rely on their body to do anything.
That's just exercise.
It is.
It's just exercise.
It's just keep getting the blood flow.
Right.
But I think if you're not trying to get better, you're getting worse. And I think every time I drive by a big Globo gym or a big place, and you see people walking in and out, and you can go by and you can see the windows and them running like little rats on the wheels. Mm-hmm. And I always wonder, Max, I talk about it often, how many of those people are really ever getting the results they want? Are they ever really happy with how they are? Or is it this vicious cycle where they show up for 3 months and they don't show because they never really see anything?
Most of them don't know enough about it to even process the question that way. Yeah. I went in, did some biceps, walked on the treadmill for 20 minutes, got to watch TV, right? Got a little sweaty, everything's fine, right? I'm doing better, and in fact, they're doing better than they would have been were they sitting at home on their butts. But we're not concerned with that level. No. We're concerned with we have bigger fish to fry than that. So
I think this type of movement and this type of understanding of how to lift weights and the things that I learned when I was young, I think everybody should learn. And what's exciting is that there are places to learn this stuff. There are training centers, there are gyms blowing up. I just think it's educating the college coaches and the high school coaches. Like, I'm pretty fortunate to have worked with some high school coaches that are taking this style of training to their kids, and and I get these results. You
were indeed fortunate, because we're obviously aware of the fact that most of them are not very good at this. Yeah. Most of them are real hard-headed about their strength and conditioning, and it's been a problem. Because of their reluctance to go ahead and introduce because of their reluctance to admit that they don't already know this. That's really the problem.
Well, look at I even encounter people that are negative towards what I'm talking about, and at the end of the day, I use these skills to compete at the top of my job for a lot of years. And it always makes me laugh when I refer to them as keyboard samurais, people on the net, message boards, different stuff, that, you know what you're talking about. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, if I did my job, and these are the skills that I use to do my job, and now I'm trying to tell you what I used, and I'm trying to give it to other people, then how could you discount and say it doesn't work?
How is it that you don't understand that 10 years of success with this method doesn't count for credentials?
Yeah.
That's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like you have a gym, you've coached people to be strong for years, and you have a dedicated people, and people say you don't know what you're talking about. And you're like, well, if I have strong people, we're saying, Max doesn't know much about Olympic lifting, but, that's all he does. I mean, it's basically his passion. I watched a guy every single day for the last 6 years. What does he do? He snatch, clean, and jerk. And
he may have learned something about it.
He might have learned something. So I just think it's, people like we were at your gym and you're looking at pictures from the 80s, like lifting weights and I mean, it's amazing. Barbells, what?
Barbells.
Free weights in the 80s, I mean, you guys always laugh with the 70s big stuff that, that was when it was cool. But, when I weighed, 300 plus pounds in the 90s, that was 90s.
You were
big.
70s big in the 90s.
Yeah. When I in the 80s when we were lifting weights, the guys that we saw, the old magazines were all the 70s guys, you see on the cover of all these old powerlifting magazines that George had, Odie Wilson and Bill Kazmaier and
Roger Estep and Doug Young and these guys that used to stride the earth.
Well, I mean, look at Estep. That guy was enormous.
Yeah, he was
beast.
Amazing beast.
Yeah.
An amazing beast.
But, Bill Starr. And, that was where we kind of fell into it in that, George and Bill Starr were friends and Bill was your coach. And I kind of grew up with a lot of that stuff and got to see and kind of live in it. And so it always kind of permeated for me. And we were fortunate that my high school was real big with that stuff. So it just, I've seen this work from, a middle-class white kid and playing football in Palos Verdes who got on to go and play in Pac-10 school and get to play in the NFL and, do all these things. And
it's an experience that most of us don't get to have.
I was fortunate.